Now broadcasting. Morning, everybody. Thanks for joining. We're just going to start the webinar in a couple of minutes, so you've just got time to grab yourselves a glass of water if you want to before we start. We'll be starting 2 or 3 minutes past the hour. Morning, everybody. The webinar on the aging context will start in just a couple of minutes. I'm just waiting for everybody to gather, so we just have a minute or two before we start the content. So good morning, everybody. Welcome to this webinar on the aging context. The webinar is jointly presented by Topio Networks and Seamster. We'll be talking today about edge use cases and micro markets, and we're joined by several colleagues on the webinar. I'll just talk you very quickly through some of the background details regarding Topio Networks. So for those of you not familiar with Topio, we describe ourselves as the catalyst for the 4th industrial revolution. At the center of everything we do is our taxonomy-driven, human-created AI platform. When we describe ourselves as a catalyst, that's for 2 reasons. The first is basically regarding market acceleration. So with the taxonomy-driven platform, we're sucking in 40,000 terms every day and analyzing and categorizing those terms and creating research. You may be familiar with the landscapes shown on the outside of this diagram. Those landscapes are views of the marketplace, if you like, a window on the platform. But the real power of the platform is actually that you can go into the platform and analyze all of the companies that we're tracking within any of the market spaces that we cover. So for instance, in the edge computing market space, we're tracking over 800 companies, and you can go onto the platform completely free of charge and have a look at all of that data and compare companies and compare market sectors. We're also providing weekly updates and information in terms of webinars such as this one, and we communicate with the market weekly through our Edge Essentials newsletter, which goes to 90,000 people every week. And we have similar activities in a number of other market spaces, including connected cars, autonomous cars, and blockchain and data platforms, just to name a few. On the other side of our business model is more about individual business acceleration, and I'll talk a little bit more about that graphic on the top left, what we call the Carolus model. But basically, using the AI platform, we're helping companies with laser-targeted focusing of their products, allowing them to understand where their best product market fit is, and then to target potential partners and companies, customer companies within those very focused market spaces. So we provide tailored insights for that, market feedback, and content creation and market access. So think of us as a sort of next generation market intelligence, market access company. You can leverage our open industrial research analysis, of course, but also at a deeper level, we can help you identify verticals from hundreds of use cases and markets. And then, of course, you can leverage our thought leadership and drill down into highly focused campaigns based on those selected use cases and industries in a highly tailored fashion. Excuse me, I've got a slight technical problem. Okay, so moving on to today's content. So that's me on the left. I'm Gavin Whitechurch. I'm the co-founder and COO of Topio Networks. I also act as our head of the Edge practice. Also joined by Jeff Hollingworth, who's the CMO of EdgeX. So hi, Jeff.
Hey, good morning.
Phil Marshall, who's our Chief Research Officer at Topio. Hi, Phil.
Good morning.
And also our CEO, Philippe Cass. So hi,
Morning.
Philippe.
Good morning.
Great. So we've got a very strong panel here today, and we'll be asking each of them to contribute at various points throughout the webinar. So what we're going to cover today is, well, we've already covered the introduction. We're going to talk a little about Seamster shortly, and you know, what is the purpose? What is Seamster? What is its purpose, and what's it trying to do in the marketplace? We're going to then start to look at the data, looking at the data methodology, and then looking at some of the key findings and use cases coming out of that research, and then we'll look at some further information and Q&A. So we're going to allow plenty of time for Q&A at the end. We always get lots of questions in these webinars, but also do feel free to ask questions throughout the webinar. If they're relevant, Philippe's going to be manning the question Q&A board and the chat board, and we'll chip in if he thinks that someone's got a qualifying question and just wants to drill down it a bit further, and we have time to do that. I will answer the question that's always comes up the most, which is, can I get this deck and can I review the presentation later? And the answer is definitely yes. It'll be available from tomorrow morning at the latest on the platform. And just on the platform, as you registered for this webinar, you are now registered for the platform. So when we refer to the platform, which we go through, you'll be able to go in and manipulate the data and so on. So so first point of business is regarding Seamster. So looking at Seamster in context, and so I want to hand over to Jeff here, who's one of the drivers behind the Seamster project. So Jeff, tell us more about Seamster.
Yeah, perfect. Thanks, Gavin. Let me just pause for a few seconds, and we can let people read the slide. So good morning, everyone, and welcome to Seamster. A very brief background, because the focus of this webinar is around the research and the insights that are going to be the most interesting. The background on Seamster was driven, I mean, even prior to the current situation we find ourselves in. There was a growing momentum around business and businesses reinventing their ability to either deliver better, newer, more personalized experiences, while at the same time building in more efficiencies and intelligence in their supply chains. And it transforms the total way that that business operates, both in terms of ability to deliver new experiences and the ability to do it with much more cost effectiveness. And obviously there are a number of technologies that are coming together that's not only around edge computing, but it's around 5G, it's around artificial intelligence, that's causing almost the perfect storm that the last time we saw changed the world around 2005 at the start of cloud. And the current crisis has only accelerated the obvious need for doing that. And businesses now who had already started doing it are able to display a different level of resiliency that will become necessary for all businesses to actually manage during these times. So the market is getting formed, and there's no doubt around the momentum and movement in that direction. And always when this happens, there tends not to be a shortage of information, examples, use cases, but part of the challenge, and this is why Gavin and the team are so interesting, part of the challenge is that the world becomes very noisy. And it's very hard actually to interpret and understand what is most important inside the data that's being seen. So we created Seamster to actually build a depth of understanding or much more continuous learning, or much more continuous kind of consistency, let's call it consistency, so that we can start to understand what we should be able to see, but we can't see because it's too noisy, and then what the implications are that come out from that are most important to understand, either from the perspective of the business outcomes that are generated and or the implications from how best to orchestrate, serve, and operate into that environment as well. The research here will go through that Gavin's about to present. We'll go through a couple of concepts around edge factors and market factors that are the starts of that structuring and that modeling. And then these models specifically around this and what we're working with Gavin and the team will continuously develop on the implications down into the Seamster site and the Seamster area. So at that point, I'd like to pass it over to you, back to you, Gavin. Let's get going.
Thanks, Jeff. Okay, so what we're talking about today is the release of a new set of data onto the Seamster platform, and that data reflects a multi-man-month project that we undertook and contributed to Seamster. I'm going to talk a little through how we develop this model. So Jeff referred to the last big change in the IT infrastructure, which was cloud, and you know, in the cloud era, we had a single platform which supported all applications. What we're moving into, and I referred to it earlier, is this fourth industrial revolution, which is the digitalization of a wide range of different vertical markets. which enables tremendous efficiencies and tremendous new business opportunities. The challenge for people involved in the market is that to understand that market, you have to understand each of the verticals, all of the use cases, and when you take a technology into the market, the way it's blended together with other technologies will vary depending on the precise segment in the market that we look at. So this is actually an area that Topio are focusing on. We're modeling this through the AI platform and a process which we refer to as Carolus AI. And what we did with the Seamster project was we took a slice out of our model looking at edge computing. And what Seamster had particularly asked us to do, as Jess highlighted, was look at verticals and technologies. So in fact, 23 different vertical segments, which you see listed here, 14 different technologies as they apply to each of those segments. And so that makes a total of 322 what we call micro markets, 322 intersections. So I'll talk a little bit now about how we built out the model. Let's actually talk about the edge factors and the market factors. So Jeff referred to these as well. So edge factors, so when people refer to the edge, they often refer to applications being latency critical, and they often refer to bandwidth issues, so heavy input and output, and how applications, how it's going to become far too costly and impractical for various reasons of the way the network works to shift all that data around. Those are obviously key factors, but there's a number of other factors that pertain to the edge and mean that applications and data processing will move to the edge. Those include geospatial knowledge, so knowledge of where the application is being used and how it's relevant to its environment, where the users are, so whether those users are hyper-local as well. And then there's issues of things like data residency. So this is can be regulatory. Things like GDPR, which require you to keep data in a certain place, or it could be simply commercial, that a corporate entity doesn't want its data to be released or can't because of the terms of its of the privacy agreements it's signed, and it can't actually allow that data to go elsewhere. And then of course there's security. So those are all key factors that make applications more edge relevant, more edgy if you like, the edge factors. We assessed all of those factors between experts in MobileEdgeX and within Topio, and we scored all of those, every vertical for its edge factors. And then we looked at market factors, and I'll talk a little bit more shortly about market factors, but basically we looked at large company activity, innovation, and market excitement. So the way we assessed the large companies, first of all, is we looked at in each micro market, 322 micro markets, using the Carolus platform. We looked at the number of companies headquartered in the US with over 5,000 employees who are active in each of the micro markets. So we could assess that through the AI process, and we could then tell you that, for instance, there's 104 companies looking at involved in IoT in the government space. So that's the large companies. Then to balance that off against the small companies, the innovation space, we looked at combination of the number of startups in each of those spaces, each of the 322 micro markets, and also the amount of startup funding, and we combined that into one data and one indices. And then we also looked at the market excitement in all of the spaces. So to do this, we used natural language processing, NLP, to assess how much each of those intersections were being discussed, and then we ranked all of those segments from the most discussed to the least discussed, giving those a score. And then we combined these three factors, the large companies, the innovation, and the market excitement, with equal weighting into one single score, which gives us what we call the market factor score, ranking it high, medium, or low. Okay. So let's now move on to looking at the key findings. So first off, what we found is demand for edge is high. I mean, when you look at the edge factors, 30% of the segments rated high in their requirement for edge. This is based on the analysis of the Topio experts and mobile edge experts combined. In fact, you can see that across this heat map here, there's actually very few sectors that were rated low. In fact, it's around 7% of sectors. So combined, that's sort of 92% more or less that are medium and high in demand. So we've got a very, very strong opportunity based on how edgy, how high an edge score each of these factors rated. And then secondly, when you look at the market factors, we also found a lot of high scoring. So this is obviously based on that company activity, startup activity, and market discussion. A slightly different map. I mean, you can see a lot of discussion around technologies like machine learning, robotics, IoT, but some very strong intersections as well between the discussion and company activity, and you can see that this maps on strongly in some places to the edge factors map as well. Phil, did you you put together some of this analysis? Did you have any comments you wanted to make on the market factors and the edge factors?
Yeah, thanks, Kevin. I guess what it does is it illustrates graphically what Jeff was talking about earlier. Is sort of the diversity of requirements that you see, sort of where value is being created. And the other thing to bear in mind is over time, these priorities will some of them will shift. We're still in sort of the early days, so we expect over time to see some movement in different areas as new solutions and new use cases emerge. So that also sort of supports the notion of the Seamster and the Catalyst in the sense that you've got to continually pay attention to how these markets and market factors are developing.
Absolutely. Okay, so moving forward into a more granular view, we're actually going to start talking about some of the edge drivers and also some of the use cases. This map here, this heat map actually shows the edge factors as they apply to the manufacturing sector when we view it through the analysis. So just when I was talking about edge factors, I highlighted that it's not just about latency critical and bandwidth. And you know, this is a clear illustration of that. In fact, what we see is data residency is a significant driver in the manufacturing space towards the edge. Latency is also incredibly important, but also geospatial is important for this market. And we're going to delve a little bit into the manufacturing segment, looking at robotics for automotive manufacturing. So Phil, what are your views on this?
Yeah, so what's interesting with the automotive sector is it's massive. I mean, 6 of the largest 10 manufacturers in the world are automotive companies. So it's huge, and at the same time, it's being forced to transform in spite of the economic headwinds and financial challenges that it faces. So this is an interesting sort of industry. It's an industry which was sort of the first or the very earliest to adopt robotics, and you can see in the top left here, General Motors in 1969. It's a photo of the spot welding robots that it had on its manufacturing plant. So 1969, it was General Motors were implementing robotics. But if you actually look at the automotive manufacturing today, you do see a lot of personnel involved in the process, and really that's because you're dealing with complexity and precision. So it means automation is difficult in the automotive sector. But that said, and just bring up the next build, Gavin, the the industry, or the push in manufacturing, has been very much towards automation and agility for obvious reasons. And it's been accelerated, if you like, after people became interested in the fourth industrial revolution, sort of around about the 2016 timeframe, which has driven sort of an interest in what Industry 4.0 means, and from the standpoint of automation and agility. But when you dig into it, you find in February 2016, in The Guardian, Mercedes announced that it was swapping robots for people on the assembly lines. And what they were finding was that automation was actually very difficult to implement. And in fact, they were having to, in a sense, de-automate it in that time frame, because of the demands of customization of vehicles. So even as we're bringing in automation into automotive manufacturing, you can see the challenges that some of the automotive companies were having in trying to implement this type of technology. If you go to the next build, Gavin, the interesting thing, and the player that's really disrupting the automotive industry is Tesla. And in 2016, Tesla tweeted, well, Elon Musk from Tesla tweeted, you can't have people in the production line itself, otherwise you'll automatically drop to people speed. So they were very aggressive in driving automation, and they still are. But in 2018, we saw Elon Musk tweet out and say, yes, excessive automation at Tesla was a mistake. To be precise, my mistake. Humans are underrated. So in other words, it's not easy to bring automation and agility to the automotive sector. But just going to the next build, Gavin, although it's challenging to implement agility and automation, I mean, that's a given that the automotive sector has been in this space for so long. Tesla and other companies like Tesla are really driving change and disrupting the traditional status quo, as are other things like changes in the automotive manufacturing process, such as electrification and autonomous systems, and the increased interest in software and in operations and maintenance and so forth. So despite these challenges, agility and automation is happening, but really not everything can be automated, is basically because of the complexity and precision of that, of the manufacturing process. So when we're considering solutions for this market and identifying those that show the most promise, they really do need to be targeted, understanding how the automotive manufacturing process works. So for example, collaborative robots are being adopted more readily within automotive manufacturing by companies like Universal Robots. AGVs by companies like Qualcomm and Daifuku. So this is certainly an interesting area, and really with the need for targeted solutions, it illustrates the importance of the micro market analysis that we've been talking about. Thanks, Gavin.
Thanks, Phil. Okay, so moving on to the next market, we also wanted to have a look at retail. Now retail's a very interesting market currently. You can see that demand is strong for the different factors in edge computing driving towards potential within the market. We've got around a third of this heat map is high demand for the various different technologies, and then much of the rest of it is medium demand. So we're seeing that retail is a strong prospective market, and certainly talking to people in the market, that's also what we're finding. I want to bring in Jeff here, because Jeff's got some views about the retail market. What are your thoughts, Jeff, on retail?
Yeah, and I think this part of the discussion and what Phil was just doing is a really good way to understand how valuable the platform and the data and the insights are, from the point of view that what we are presenting in this webinar is the highest of high levels. We're scratching the surface. The power of this work starts to become visible when you understand what questions you actually want to answer and what questions are good to understand in each different segment. So I think retail is a great example of that, because there's a narrative that at the highest level that all retailers are dead, Amazon's going to eat them, everything's going online. But if you actually look inside the retail industry, you start to see some very fascinating insights that clearly indicate that that actually isn't true. Whereas everything isn't going online, we still live in a physical world, and this has been tremendously highlighted at the moment. Now, I'm showing these two slides from a webinar, and I really want to, part of what we do in Seamster is call out the people who have really good knowledge that we find. And this is a webinar I'd highly recommend about retail resiliency and what it means by a company called Perch Interactive. And Perch Interactive are a good example of a software company or a software plus display company that's changing the experiences inside retail to actually give their customers systems of differentiation inside the business. But inside this webinar, some of the interesting facts that they do point out, that in actual fact, in store closing, there is actually two types of stores that are closing. It's the large department stores that are just having so much inventory but not selling enough, their cost structure is completely gone. Or it's the specialty stores where they only sell one thing. There is an explosion of companies that's actually opening more stores where they're more focused and they have smaller inventory and they are more automated. So in 2019, for every one brand closing stores, 5 brands are actually opening them. Just 16 retailers were responsible for 73% of the store closings in 2019. So that's from the physical side. Physical retail is not going anywhere, but physical retail is getting reinvented now a lot faster than we already knew it would. Then there was this mystery about online and how online is cheaper and online is better. Whereas that was maybe true in the early days of the online e-commerce, definitely not true now. And for example, Amazon's ad business now is running at a 19 billion top line in 10 years. They're taking that 19 billion from everybody else. They're not just printing money. So the cost of acquisition is going way up. The actual margins go tighter and tighter. 30% of things bought online are returned. So the backwards and forwards in supply chain completely changes. What we start to see, and it's happening at the moment, is the actual physical retail is starting to get automated, and it's replacing the manual shelf filling, the manual shopping, but the physical value of that property is still high. So I'll pass it over to you.
Jeff, we have one question, which is: do you expect this the ratio you highlighted to change as a result of the coronavirus pandemic?
That's a good question, and what I expect to happen, and this is an instinctual answer at the moment. is that I think the opening, I think physical retail will become much more distributed. I think it will become, though, very quickly much more automated and much more efficient in the operations. So I think the most interesting retailers to watch are the ones that are already going down that journey, and see how they actually accelerate or not, to actually give a trend kind of feeling.
Awesome, thanks, Jeff. So, moving on, we also wanted to highlight the healthcare market. And obviously, healthcare is a market that's at the top of everybody's minds at the moment. But it's also one that's going through significant market changes, technology enablement, and so on. You can see here that drivers, unsurprisingly in healthcare, that data residency security are significant drivers in this market, as well as latency and some geospatial drivers as well. Phil has some comments around IoT in healthcare, and it's a market he's looked at closely. So Phil, what are your views?
Yeah, sure, Gavin. And certainly healthcare is an interesting space, particularly when we consider the current pandemic. In our research, we see a huge number of use cases, and they can be have very specific characteristics, and they can vary quite a lot between regions. But that said, you can generally classify the use cases, and just going to the first build, Gavin, you can generally classify the use cases in terms of, in the context of telemedicine, image analysis, patient monitoring, clinical operations, as well as medication management. There are other areas, but these are sort of some of the primary focal points that we see within IoT and healthcare. Just if we consider the catalysts or the enablers for IoT and healthcare, there's obviously major sort of macro conditions such as ballooning healthcare costs and the current pandemic, which bring healthcare into focus. And then there's certainly key technology enablers. So there's sort of the proliferation of IoT and endpoint devices, connectivity and compute capabilities, data capture and analytics, which is particularly important, as is the engagement that we're starting to see with some of the tier one players. But there are inhibitors, and we're sort of all a lot of us are aware of those inhibitors. And when we consider them, it really brings the micro market targeting into focus, and even the potential to consider adjacent markets like health and fitness. So obviously regulation's tough. And what you see in healthcare is the focus towards, or the necessary focus towards safety kind of tends to drive us towards a sort of innovation by consensus type of paradigm. Can be challenging if you're trying to introduce disruptive technologies. Ecosystems are complex and resistant to disruption. And obviously there's a lot of vertical integration as well as specialized and proprietary systems that are implemented. So that obviously brings in integration and interoperability challenges. Reliability, security, scalability, these are all challenges as well that are important in this regard. So certainly if players can overcome these challenges, there's opportunities for market lock-in, and there really are some interesting use cases out there, and as I said before, lots of them. What I thought I'd do now is just introduce a couple that are interesting, and illustrate some of the edge compute capabilities that are needed for IoT and healthcare. So the first use case is smart ambulances, and within sort of this category, you see a lot of different ways in which this is implemented, and it's technology that's implemented across the world, in the US, Europe, and even use cases in countries like Vietnam, particularly around traffic management and diagnostic type solutions. But for this particular one, we're going to talk about the UK and a trial that O2's done in partnership with Samsung Visionable and Launch Cloud. And what it does is it enables smart ambulances to send live video feeds and other real-time intelligence for remote triage and diagnostic treatment. So we could certainly see this as a use case becoming more relevant moving forward, and possibly the same technologies ending up in other domains where that same kind of capability is needed, such as in clinics or possibly even in residential centres where patients reside, or elderly, or people who are vulnerable. The other key area is also in traffic management around smart ambulances. So you see the need to coordinate with smart city type initiatives as well. You see the efforts to coordinate with smart city initiatives. So just going to another use case, Singapore is possibly one of the most advanced countries, or it has some of the most advanced technologies in and around aged healthcare, which can also be parlayed into remote patient monitoring. And certainly that becomes important at this time, or sharp focus at this time when we consider the lockdown. So in Singapore, one use case is a solution that Tata Consulting has collaborated with Singapore Management University to develop its solution. And what they're doing is they're capitalizing on all kinds of sensors, whether it's for to monitor personal activities, to identify dangers such as electrical devices, to integrate with medicine dispensing machines and so forth. It also includes other solutions that combine the sensors with AI, for example, to measure the walking gait and foot motion of a patient to preemptively identify medical events such as strokes or cardiac arrests. So there's a lot of real-time functions that are implemented. Obviously, the integration of many devices and certainly the local data residency is important here for privacy and security reasons. So interesting use cases in and around this area. And then the last one, and one that I doubted feasible in the past, remote surgery. There have actually been several successful trials with real people conducted in China and India with the supporter companies, including Huawei, China Unicom, and Corindus Vascular Robotics. And what they've been doing is using 5G technology and ultra low latency connectivity to do things like remote heart surgery. So this is an example of where they're really pushing the envelope in terms of technology. And certainly, if this type of technology matures in this form or even a lesser form, it could have a dramatic impact on the way in which healthcare can be delivered more globally. So with that, Gavin, I'll hand it back to you.
Thanks, Phil. Okay, moving on. One thing we can tell through the platform as well is using this research, just taking a different slice. So the slices we were just looking at were looking through a vertical and the varied impacts of the vertical. But actually, if we look at it with the technology perspective, we can also see that edge computing is going to generate a whole new acceleration in the market around capabilities and new technologies. So for instance, here, just looking at computer vision, you can see that there's a very high correlation with computer vision to the edge, i.e. that edge computing will enable a wide range of edge computing use cases. So Philippe is our analyst in the edge AI space, and this is his bread and butter, which he tracks daily, weekly. So Philippe, what are your views on computer vision and video analytics?
Thanks, Gavin. we've talked a lot already about computer vision and video analytics during this webinar, but very quickly, I think few thoughts. One is AI for computer vision as a market is tracked extensively in the literature, and if you look at what the type of market sizing you get, you realize that if you add all those market, or if you compare all those studies, you don't really get a good sense of what's happening in the market space. The best analysis I've seen is the one that in 2018 is showing 3.4 billion for AI for computer vision, and a growth of about 30% per year, anywhere between 30 to 45% per year. The verticals, of course, that are driving are all pretty well known. The most exciting one is automotive, with ADAS, fast assisting driving. Automotive systems. That space alone now has 3 companies that are worth 60 billion in value. So Waymo, Cruise, and Mobileye. And of course, it's about figuring out how to do autonomous driving over time, right? So more and more computer vision is being embedded in the car, and is being used by the driver to actually make, or to the car to make decisions. So that's one, and I would say the biggest use case right now in terms of both value and activity. Phil has talked about healthcare as well, but the two, and retail is also one where there is a lot of activities. But the two I wanted to highlight are consumer and manufacturing. We're going to do that in the next slide. The key drivers. Sorry, Gavin, I just want to point on the key drivers. I think the issues that we're facing right now in this market are 3 types. One is the technology is not completely there yet. So we're still working on the technology to make it completely efficient. The technology itself, right? So we're working on 3D and 4D computer vision now, and we're making it far more reliant. Then you have also everything around the technology that makes the technology possible. So the cameras, the sensitivities, faster interface between the systems, so the information gets there faster. So as technology makes improvement, you're going to see more and more use case emerging, and more activity happening here, right? So track how if the technology is already there. Then the second thing that is also a key hindrance to this market is the amount of technical knowledge. So we need more computer vision scientists, and as more as we can, we need more activities there from a technical standpoint. So shortage of skilled worker is a big thing. And the last thing is something that Phil touched upon on manufacturing is awareness. So knowing that the technology is around, and that people can use the technology to do those type of things. Right now in manufacturing and in other places, there is still a lot of work to be done in terms of market education. So let's go very quickly to the 2 other slides. So I wanted to highlight two companies in the manufacturing space, going to a little bit deeper in terms of what Phil was talking about. So this company Neurala, who is working on an AI-powered drone inspection system. So 2 ideas there. The first one is the identification of defects. So in oil and gas pipelines, lightning strikes on wind turbines, antenna and cell towers, so figuring out what's going wrong there. And those type of technologies are also being used in manufacturing as well. And then in manufacturing, the other thing that this type of technologies are doing is to review products as well as workflow, and making sure that the workflow are being performed according to specs. So tracking is also very important there. The second one is this company, AD-Link, a Chinese company. that is providing an AR powered tracking system, and the big use case that they provided was this quarter was about assigning a box on the right pallet. Very simple, right? So the worker show a box on a scanner. The system scans the box and tell the worker whether the box needs to be on that pallet or not. So that type of technology is also used for searching for missing inventory or automated bin pickings. Again, right, as Phil mentioned, I mean, there is a lot of work to be done on manufacturing. I would say that the technology for computer vision and the application for computer vision and manufacturing are very broad and are going to be massive. But again, the technology is not completely there yet for that space, and you're going to see more and more activity happening as the technology emerge. The second is about people tracking. And so people tracking is on the radar, and even more now than it has ever been. Palantir is working with the US government on these topics. The French government is also doing a pilot with Paris subway station to track if people are wearing masks. The company I wanted to highlight there is this company IntelliFusion, who is definitely it's a Chinese company, definitely leading that space, of course, due to the fact that the privacy law in China are a little bit more lenient than in the US and in Europe. And it started in 1995 with law enforcement applications. So they were tracking law violators, initially people that were crossing street, not on the sidewalks. And then they started tracking law violators driving speed through license plates and faces. They now moved toward custom clearance, where you can basically go through custom without having to give your paper. It's something that is being tested right now in airports in China, where you basically left your luggage at a check-in point, and you go through, take your plane without giving any paper or anything. It's fairly impressive. They use the same technology for the G20 summit monitoring, and now they are working with the Chinese government on a system that basically track humans across wherever they are, whether they are at the office, whether they are on a railway station or everywhere, understanding facial recognition, temperature, to map the spread of the pandemic and highlight the people that are the spreader. So those are a few things that people are doing in computer vision today. There are a lot. There is going to be a lot happening moving forward for sure, and across the industry, across the board.
Thank you, Philippe. So just before we step to the Q&A, just a little plug for the further information. So what we're celebrating today is the launch of this data into the Seamster platform, and the guys at Seamster have done a fantastic job of visualizing this data. So you can go to seamster.io and choose up to 5 markets to compare and contrast 5 markets across those 23 markets, and refresh and compare and contrast against all of them of their edge factors and market factors across the 14 different technologies. You can also come to the topionetworks.com platform, where if you're a data junkie, you can drill even further into the data. So we've actually got market pages available for each of the 322 individual micro markets, and you can look at the companies that are active, startups, etc. What their activities are and so on. But I do want to make sure we've got plenty of time for Q&A. So Philippe, you've been monitoring the questions as they come in. What would you like to put to the panel?
So the first question is around COVID, right? COVID-19, and how do you see COVID-19 impacting the emergence of edge computing?
Are you directing that at me, Gab?
I think it's a question for the entire panel.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'll say that. I mean, COVID-19 obviously has vast impacts. It's pushing. It's changing many industries, but it's making us rethink many industries. So you can see that supply chain, where we manufacture and how we manufacture, how we manage healthcare, how we manage many of the things we touched on in this webinar, like the flow of people you were just talking about, and how we look at people. Many of those things are edge applications. It may de-emphasize some edge applications, but we're also seeing a more distributed workforce, for instance, and that'll drive even more edge activities. Jeff, do you have any views on this?
Yeah, I think a couple of recent inputs that have come up. I mean, I think one thing that it is causing is exactly what you said, Gavin, around supply chains. We really live in a world that is driven in all industries through supply chains that still obey the industrial era principles and scale. They are wanting to become more intelligent and start to become demand-driven rather than supply-driven, which introduces digital technologies. And if you think about supply chains and then think about doing them in a digital way, immediately supply chains are distributed, and edge computing and these other technologies then are key inside all of those transformations. So and they will also become much more important to countries. That's something else that we should always keep in mind. Then I heard a funny thing from another session we were doing, where we've been talking about remote healthcare, remote learning, remote workforce, but I don't think anyone's ever really taken them seriously before. And now I'm hearing things that say in big companies, what was a pet project has now become the core thing we need to do. Another statement was, this was around remote healthcare, something that we thought would happen in 5 years is now happening in 1. So I think definitely we are going to accelerate the deployment, not only of edge computing, but then of the technologies that run on top and around it because of this.
Yeah, very quickly on this topic, I wanted to say that if you look at the type of event that is happening, COVID-19, right? So it's a basic shift in terms of the economy. And so people are shifting their investment budget for growing the market line to more containing, so finding new product and then containing costs. So this is and those type of projects are being evaluated now. So they are probably looking at newer technology in order to implement those use cases. So based on the past and what happened in 99, as well as what happened in 2008, you're going to see an acceleration of the adoption of new technology, and edge is going to be one of those, because people are going to develop project on new technology that are, of course, cheaper now. The other question was 5G is often cited as a driver for edge compute. How important is high-speed fiber to the home for the consumer market? So do we need 5G to implement home automation in a way?
Should we go to Phil first on that one?
So Gavin, I got a little bit of an audio, so I couldn't tell whether that question was for me, but
yes.
Okay, so yeah, I mean, so it's one of the technology, if we're talking about 5G, it's one of the technologies that's needed, but it's really necessary when you're untethered, right? So what are the use cases that are untethered? And then as you start to scale some of those solutions I was talking about, they become inherently wireless. The question is, can you implement them? Do you implement them, and is it economical to implement them with 5G, or do you use unlicensed technologies? So there's some sort of key factors, right? Like spectrum availability, operator engagement. You have a longer value chain essentially with 5G. So it means then, yes, it has a role, but it's not the only solution. It's one of many for the purposes of connectivity. And I think you'll just see a blend depending on the use case requirements. The use case requirements will drive it.
Jeff, do you have any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think I agree with what Phil just said. I think applications will be written in a way that they're agnostic to the access. They have to be written that way, and then depending on where they're getting deployed, and then are they mobile versus nomadic versus fixed? I think there's different alternatives to do. But I think what's always interesting with 5G to me is, and I've worked in mobile for 25 years since we first, started. We should always appreciate with mobile that it's only the only bit of wireless is between the device and the base station, and increasingly the densification of those base stations and the bandwidth requirements through those are multiplying incredibly, and that will now accelerate and exponentially increase with 5G. So I think the biggest winner of the 5G market, like before the radios have got deployed, is actually fiber and fixed line.
Yeah, absolutely.
Gavin, it's 10:02, so.
Yeah, I mean, I was just looking at. I see we've still got well over 125 people on the webinar, and we've got lots of questions. So, although we would normally wrap up at 10, do you guys want to just carry on taking a few questions?
Sure.
It's like we've not got anywhere to go, Gavin.
If we're okay to do that.
Yeah, let's do another 10 minutes of questions, okay? Jerome James is asking, is the smart ambulance being developed by private company with an interest in motor vehicle tech or medical tech? To what extent are they working with hospital and medical professionals on the concept? So that's a question for Phil, who brought that up.
Phil, can you hear us?
I'm sorry, I can't hear the question. So you might want to keep moving.
Okay. So the other question, when discussing edge use case, mostly in literature and in research, mobile gaming is mostly cited. Will this be the first and most widely available, or any other? What is each of your opinions? So let's start with Gavin. I know Gavin is spending a lot of time there.
It's a big use case for mobile edge, and when you look at consumer edge, so obviously most people tend to think initially of consumer applications. It's certainly one that's very widely cited. Certainly for multiplayer gaming. If you look at, I think it's Sprint's new 5G package is launched with Hatch as an integral service when it first came out. So that's an indicator as well. So yeah, I do think it's significant, but also many of the corporate orientated applications are really strong drivers of edge.
Jeff?
Yeah, the multiplayer gaming was the first place Mobile Edge X actually engaged, and we engaged with Niantic to solve some of their problems around Pokemon Go that they understood required the involvement of the mobile operators in new and different ways. And the CEO of Niantic is the guy called John Hankey, and he had a great quote somewhere that gaming is where technology goes to incubate. And I think that's incredibly true. What we have seen develop is that the problems that multiplayer gaming actually had and do have is around high fidelity synchronization over a large population of players. What we've seen is that that's exactly the same problem that's seen in autonomous driving, in vehicle to infrastructure, is the ability, it's the same in drones flying around. Anything that requires coordination is kind of like falling into that same use case category, and it's pure intelligent synchronization of endpoints. So as Gavin said, from the consumer space, then I think the gaming market is going to be interesting, but I think the technologies that are developed there are going to be the same technologies that get applied across the other industries as well.
Very quickly, Phil.
Yeah, so in terms of and I missed a lot of that because of I was having problems with my audio. So are you mobile gaming?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean it's an interesting space. The thing about it is it's got there's so much scale associated, or potential scale associated with it. There's a lot of players who are adjacent and are beneficiaries. So if you sort of think of how that ecosystem can develop, there's sort of incremental enablers that'll drive it. So you know, AR, VR type technologies, and so forth. That I think it shows promise, but obviously, yeah, there's challenges around its implementation and scale. But certainly, the industry needs it, and it's so I'm sort of pretty bullish on it actually, as an opportunity.
Yeah, and I agree with what you said, Phil, and you know, extending to AR, VR, an application in the industrial sector, like what you're seeing with cars, you know, cars being driven through augmented reality application, all those type of implementation are going to be fairly big moving forward. One of the talking about bigger space. One of the space I wanted to highlight is automotive and of course autonomous vehicle. Right now, a lot of software is being run on the cars. You know, far more than probably anywhere else. And what's needed is communication layer, so V2X, right, between the vehicle and the rest of the world, if you will, and that my take is going to happen quickly. So you're going to see automotive becoming a huge driver and a huge implementer of edge computing solution in the next, I would say, 2 to 3 years. So gaming is definitely there right now, but automotive should be following quickly, because the infrastructure, the only missing piece of infrastructure is the V2X piece. So it should happen quickly. One last question was about, and I think it's a question from Jean-Marc about public versus private edge. Is there like one that is growing faster than the other at this point? You know, Jeff or Gavin?
Good question. I would say that, yeah, I would say actually probably the public edge is expanding more rapidly right now, because if you look at there's a huge range of technology enablement going on in the hyperscale cloud companies, as well as within the telcos. Jeff, what's your thoughts on it?
Yeah, this is a really good question. So and the real question is, when is there enough ubiquitous kind of coverage in that public side to allow large companies to actually depend on it in all their locations? And some of those large companies it's so important to them that they are implementing private edge because they can. And the benefits outweigh, you know, the fact they have to do that as dedicated infrastructure rather than consuming as a service. I mean, so from our own company point of view in Mobile EdgeX, we actually ensured that we could support private edge as well as public edge in exactly the same way in terms of operation and deployment, just so that we can handle both of those opportunities. And then I think the whole market gets coverage probably in about 3 to 4 years' time, is a bit my feel. The seeds that you lay now are going to, you know, start to run, walk, and, well, I should say crawl, walk, and run in about 3 years, I think.
Yeah. Okay, fantastic. Well, we've gone over by 10 minutes, and we've still got 90 people involved, but I think we should start to wrap it up to be respectful for everybody's time. So just moving on very quickly. We have a range of forthcoming webinars which you can engage with on the same platform, specifically around edge computing, the state of the industry on June the 4th, which I'll be leading. Really interesting one on architecting the distributed cloud with Ankus and Glow, who's the CEO of Volterra, and also Philippe's autonomous vehicles, state of the industry. So he was commenting a little bit on state of the industries, which will be in a month or two. Don't forget Edge Computing World coming up on October 12th and 13th at the Santa Clara Convention Center. It's the leading event for edge computing. And thank you so much for your participation. Really appreciate you all staying and asking so many questions. Thanks so much to my fellow panelists. Some really great contributions there. Please do fill out the quality questionnaire as you leave. We'd love to hear what you thought of the webinar and any suggestions you have for future topics and improvements. And please do stay healthy. Thanks so much again for your attention.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.